Each presentation here, we are learning something new. And now, we are going to have Yohany Albornoz, and she is the creative director of the Marketeer Architect here in Miami. And she's going to talk about the transformative power of neuroarchitecture.
Hello. I believe spaces transform lives. That's what I ask you today. Do you remember the first time you were in a space that felt so comforting, so welcoming, recharging, and yet you couldn't quite explain why? Or on the flip side, do you recall a space that caused you fear, stress, or anxiety? In 1989, a little girl visited her aunt's house and stood mesmerized by a sculpture bathed in natural light that gave her an inexplicable sense of peace and satisfaction. Her cousin played the violin, so she did too. And she noticed that while some concert halls were inspiring for them, some others they disliked. This curiosity led her to become an architect because she wanted to create spaces that were inspiring for fellow musicians. And you guessed it, the little girl was me. I became an architect in 2008, thinking that acoustics were the key to create spaces for musicians. So after completing a master's in architectural acoustics and working in more than 50 projects, I realized there was more to it. But in 2014, I left my country and arrived in the US, landing in the world of commercial interiors, but still with that same curiosity. So after studying visual design, branding, and marketing, I concluded that architecture had a lot to learn from marketing. I noticed that understanding people precedes the design process. And as I delved deeper, I saw that certain spaces don't just create better experiences. They also connect people, drive productivity, increase sales, and improve well-being, leading to significant social and economic benefits. But I still wondered if this was just my perception until suddenly I learned that a 13th century monastery helped save tens of thousands of lives in the 20th century. In the 1950s, a disease infected nearly 60,000 people per year, leading to approximately 3,000 deaths annually. And Jonas Salk, this man here, was working on a vaccine, but he felt stuck on his research. So he decided to take a break, and he traveled from his lab in Pittsburgh to a 13th century monastery in Italy, to Basilica of San Francesco de Assisi, a place of both natural and man-made beauty. I actually had the great fortune of experiencing this place myself. It truly invokes a sense of peace and wonder. It was there that Salk finalized the process leading to the vaccine. So much so that he said,
"Under the influence of that historic place, I intuitively designed the research that I felt would result in a vaccine for polio. I returned to my laboratory in Pittsburgh to validate my concepts and found that they were correct."
So it was not just me. This idea that spaces could somehow influence in people had been around far longer than I thought. And in Salk's case, it had saved tens of thousands of lives, but still felt anecdotal. So I kept investigating and found that almost 30 years later, Roger Ulrich asked whether a view of nature through a window could influence recovery of patients after surgery. So he conducted an experiment with two groups of patients, one with views of nature and one with views of a brick wall. And his results confirmed his theory. The patients with views of nature had a faster recovery, needed fewer painkillers, and complained less than the group with views of a brick wall. So this was no longer anecdotal. This idea that spaces could influence people were also helping, providing valuable insights for designers. And this is how I got into neuroarchitecture, which explores the intangible relationship that we have with space, conducts scientific research to understand it, and then applies that knowledge in the design process to promote well-being. This field has changed my life so much that I specialize in this by completing a master's, and I dedicate my work to research, application, consultation, and creating awareness about neuroarchitecture. It's about designing with a deep understanding of human needs, placing the human being at the center of the design decisions. And moreover, our brain is very similar to the brain of someone from 10,000 years ago. And while technology has advanced rapidly in recent years, our brain hasn't necessarily evolved all that much. For example, have you ever felt like someone was watching you and when you turn around, they actually were? This is due to a primitive survival mechanism. Our brain is constantly and unconsciously scanning the environment to figure out if we are safe or in danger. In a simplified way, and to make it accessible for you, and to invite you to explore further, this is thanks to our autonomic nervous system, who is like this guy who is inside of us, controlling our heartbeat, our breathing, our stress responses, and basically making decisions to keep us alive without having to think about it. And that helps us navigate spaces. He gathers information through the senses. How many senses do you think we have? Who says we have 5? Who says we have more than 5? Some authors say that we have at least 9, and possibly up to 33 senses. This is an ongoing area of research, but the point is that what tells us if this place feels cold is different to what tells us if the chair is comfortable or where we are in relation to other elements in the room, because our perception of the space doesn't rely on a single sense. Our body is processing complex sensory information quickly to respond rapidly. And one of these responses is related to the meaning we assign. A good example is with colors, which in a simplified way we can understand across 3 levels of experience. One is the biological level, which is common to most human beings regardless of place or time. At this level, a dark red color might remind us of blood because it's something deeply rooted in our biology. Then there is the cultural level, which is shaped by our cultural background. At this level, red color might symbolize love in Latin America or love in Asia. And finally, we have the personal level, which is influenced by our personal memories, experiences, and expectations. At this level, a particular shade of red might be special for someone because it reminds them of their grandmother's lipstick, while for another, it could trigger an unpleasant memory. This is why, even though we share commonalities, we don't all perceive things in the same way. And it's why it's so important that we as designers understand the user, so we can create a space that supports growth and opportunities for them. Because these levels of experience can be related to the meaning we assign and the decisions that we make. Because when we are navigating, we are constantly making decisions. In doing so, our brain's top priority is survival. It takes in information, evaluates it, and decides if something is a threat or an opportunity. So while decision-making is another very complex process, for simplicity, when it comes to navigating spaces, we can think of 3 key things that our brain takes into consideration. One is reducing fear for survival. Also, how this can space help us save energy for efficiency, and providing pleasure for satisfaction. Now let's explore how we can create spaces to meet these needs. First, how can we reduce fear? One effective way is through balance. The same way our body seeks balance by keeping our temperature and sugar levels steady, spaces should be created in balance so we can feel comfortable and safe. One of the research shows that we have preference for curved shapes, but does it mean everything should be curved? No, it should be done in balance. Think about this space. How does it feel? Does it give you enough information to feel safe in it? When our senses receive no information, that sensory deprivation stresses the brain. So is too much information the answer? No, because that leads to cognitive overload. That's why the creation of balance helps prevent a space from inducing fear. And how can we help our brain save energy and be efficient? One way is through legibility. We achieve legibility by designing a space and its components so the user can easily understand it, then form a mental map of it and navigate it. This way, we can quickly assess it to be free of any danger. Clutter, for example, forces our brain to work harder to scan for danger, making a great mental effort to process information, also known as cognitive overload. That's why when we have a space that's very well organized, we feel that sense of calm. It also applies when navigating spaces, and it also applies at the urban scale. And finally, how can we create pleasure? For me, one of the best ways is through beauty. And while beauty might seem subjective, research in neuroaesthetics, which studies how our brain perceives beauty, show that much of what we find beautiful is related to nature. So it's not just personal taste. It can have a personal component, but it's more than that. Perhaps that's why we're so attracted to include elements of nature into our built environments, whether it's plants, textures, materials, or even fractals. This is called biophilia. Another way to incorporate beauty is through the inclusion of artistic elements into our built environments. Because, as Yohany Albornoz said once, only beauty can change and humanize the world. And as mentioned before, what ties everything together is the meaning we assign. When we design for meaning, we promote a sense of belonging, which triggers emotions and strengthens the memory, which are all essentials for our cognitive health and survival. Because a sense of belonging to a place is deeply connected to well-being and stress reduction. And this approach can impact metrics across various industries. For example, in workplaces, it can improve employee satisfaction, staff retention, reduce health claims. In retail, it can increase sales, dwell time, which is the time a customer spends on a space, and the hedonic value, which is the perceived pleasure that a product provides. In hospitality, it can increase the average daily room rate and the social media presence. And in learning environments, it can reduce stress and improve the learning outcomes. But above all, it can lead to more sustainable buildings that people will want to preserve. One example of this is a survey that showed that 24% in a group of individuals were willing to spend from $50 to $100 more for a plant-filled hotel room. If you apply this to a mid-range hotel with 200 rooms with an occupation rate of 50%, it could lead to an increased revenue of almost $500,000. So neuroarchitecture isn't just about aesthetics, it leads to well-being and economic success. As we design for the future, it's vital to consider how spaces can support human needs, foster a sense of belonging, and contribute to a sustainable and thriving society. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the power of spaces. I would like to invite you to take these insights and apply them in your own work, creating spaces where people can thrive and businesses can succeed. Thank you.